Hello and welcome to Original Soundchat, where video game music is a work of art. On each episode, it's our goal to help you learn about two soundtracks from the world of games, as well as the people, stories, and critical tracks behind them. My name is DeVader.
And I'm Peter Spezia. We're brought to you by Anonymous Dinosaur and Rhymes with Asia. It's time to appreciate great OSTs and the games that they come from, without getting too bogged down in music theory. Joe, what are this week's games?
Up first is 2012's Professor Layton vs. Phoenix Wright, Ace Attorney, a crossover adventure between the famous professor and the bumbling lawyer in a magical kingdom where witch trials are regularly carried out.
Following that is the globe-trotting end to the Puzzle Adventure series that stood out on the Nintendo DS and 3DS platforms, 2014's Professor Layton and the Azran Legacy. Ah yes, the clear theme being Reiton Kyoju, or Professor Layton. They're games on 3DS. They both released in 2014 in North America, and they really desperately need Switch releases of some kind.
I would absolutely. Now, granted, I don't know if I'd say that Versus needs a Switch release. I'm just saying, give it to me. That being said, though, how are none of the Layton games on Switch?
I mean, the second trilogy, at least. I mean, well, even the first trilogy. The first trilogy's on mobile. Like, you can get Curious Village, Diabolical Box, Unmon Future, Lost Future, sorry for those in the UK. You can get those on iOS.
I assume Last Spectre isn't that far off.
I mean, you gotta think so, right? Like, that second trilogy is just begging for it, for sure. But yeah, Switch, with how popular it is, I mean, come on. It can't be only on 3DS at this point. Joe, last week we mentioned, as we are now into 2021, for better or for worse, 6 days in, it was looking...
The whole year happened this week.
That's a good way of putting it. Just a miserable start to 2021 here in the United States. But, now that we're really into it, we mentioned last week that we should mention our gaming resolutions for 2021. If you missed our favorite games of 2020, be sure to catch that from last week on episode 102. So, Joe, what are your 8, you said, gaming resolutions for the year? Games that you are aspiring to play, may not get to it, but titles that you're hoping to go back and play.
So I tried to avoid anything that came out in 2020 because I have a separate list for that backlog. But my 8 games are, I would like to play Final Fantasy VIII, which would bring my number of finished Final Fantasy games to 4. This has been on my resolutions list for 3 years now, Nier Automata. I want to play The Outer Wilds. I want to play Resident Evil 4. You'll be happy with the next 2 because it's Danganronpa, Trigger Happy Havoc, and Ori and the Blind Forest. And then lastly is Bloodborne, which I have very little hope that that'll actually get crossed off. And then the Somnium Files.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's been one that's been on my backlog for a while. That's a good pick. I also have Bloodborne on mine. So there's an interesting comparison. You've already played Bloodborne a little bit, though. I never have. So I think that's an interesting comparison. I do have some 2020 games on mine. For example, I have Cyberpunk 2077 on here. And that's more waiting for whenever they sort out getting the next-gen console updates over there, because not touching it before then, not rewarding any bad behavior. But so that'll be on there. Hitman 3 I have on here, but in kind of a weird de facto way. Like, I have the 2 previous Hitman games and never got around to them. So I want to you can carry those levels forward into Hitman 3. So let's just say Hitman Trilogy in a way as one of them. The Pathless. I have an Apple device now, and I have Apple Arcade, and shocked me that the Pathless is on Apple Arcade. So that may be where I give it a go. I've got it already downloaded on my phone, and maybe one of the next games that I play, to be honest. Fire Emblem 3 Houses, been meaning to get to for a long time, and I haven't. I started Doom 2016 last year and need to get back to it, and you can just loop in Doom Eternal in there. I think that's just a fair kind of duo pack there. Valhalla Cyberpunk bartender action has been on my Switch for far too long. And also, again, you can loop in Coffee Talk in there. I feel very similar games, different developers, but different aesthetics and but the same sort of game style there. And then Super Mario Sunshine. I figure when you guys get around to that for Smash Your Pieces, check that off the Mario 3D All-Stars pack. So for me, Cyberpunk 2077, Hitman Trilogy, Pathless, Fire Emblem Three Houses, Doom 2016, Bloodborne, Valhalla, and Super Mario Sunshine.
Not a bad list. Not a bad list at all.
With that being said, getting our future games out of the way, what about current games we're playing? Joe, how you doing? What are you playing?
As of last night, I finished Paradise Killer.
So you played Paradise Killer before you played Danganronpa. You are maddening.
Yeah. To be fair, I'd already started Paradise Killer by the time we recorded, the last episode, but it's fine. It's got a really good story. It's got really good writing, but, oh boy, they picked the wrong genre to make that game. It's a 3D exploration game. Imagine in Ace Attorney, if it was a 3D exploration game and every time you talked about something with anybody, it opened up dialogue options with almost everybody else on the map, and everybody's all spread out to the point where it's just endless walking and fast travel costs money. It just makes it a bit more of a slog than it feels like it needs to. Obviously, something can be going back because I finished it, but it's fine. I don't think I would have put it as a Game of the Year contender, as a lot of people I've heard have said, but I'm glad I at least played it.
I feel like there are interesting parallels between that and Danganronpa. I mean, people definitely brought that game up as a reference, what Paradise Killer is trying to go after.
I believe they have straight up said that it was inspired by Danganronpa.
And you'll see when you get to playing that. But fortunately, in Danganronpa, fast travel is free, and movement about the environment, whether it's school, island, whatever, you can run. So it's very quick, and you don't have that ballooning dialogue option. So I think you'll appreciate that.
I also played Disc Room. It's fun. It's actually very fun. I don't think I'll go back to it. I was able to roll credits in like an hour, but it has a lot of stuff that I just didn't do because I either didn't have the skill for it, or just I got what I needed out of the game, and that's fine. Though it has some really, really great difficulty options. You can turn down what speed the saws move. You can turn down the difficulty of the unlock conditions for different rooms. It's just a bunch. You could slow down the entire game. Very good. I want to give a huge shout out to the difficulty options in Disc Room. Very good.
That's excellent. That's really good to hear. I beat Assassin's Creed Valhalla. That was a couple weeks ago, but enough that it was in 2020 and is able to make my list there. Yeah, the main story with the Viking adventure is fine, but I feel like it is the best modern day Assassin's Creed story game in 8 years. They have finally tried to pull together everything that's been going on, and they have a direction for where they want to go in the future. That's real exciting to me as someone who actually cares about that. I know not everyone who plays Assassin's Creed does, but they had a real good twist in that game, and it's one you could predict if you paid enough attention, but it was kudos at Ubisoft. You don't often see that in an Assassin's Creed game, so I was pretty impressed there. Also started Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War. It was a game I got for Christmas. I'm a little bit into it. It's interesting to see how they pay homage to the original Black Ops, because this is a direct sequel. That's right, Black Ops 2, not a direct sequel. This one is. See certain characters coming back to the point where a lot of people remember in the original Black Ops, the main mission where you're in the Vietnam War and you're flying overhead and you're lighting up the jungle with napalm, and you have Give Me Shelter from the Rolling Stones playing. That's the memorable mission from that game. Very first big mission in this sequel is really trying to echo and call back to that. It's you know what you're doing to try to get players back, but it's certainly setting up those who did not play the game 10 years ago. You can just jump into it fresh. So that's probably about a third of the way into that, I would guess. And then based on last week's episode, I started and beat A Short Hike.
Yeah.
So thank you for your recommendation. That was exactly what you delivered it as, and it was worth it. It was very cute and adorable. I expected the end to be heavier, and I don't know why people are complaining about it. It may have been a slight tonal shift, but
yeah, like it's not that, like reviews talked about it like it was some massive tone change, but it's really not.
I was expecting a lot worse, let's just say. So just go in with that expectation if you play it. But yeah, wow, just adorable and a lot of fun. I think I had like 13 golden feathers by my attempt up the mountain. And then I messed up my glide, like jumping off on the draft.
Oh no.
Like, I didn't hold the glide button. And so I thought it was like a kind of cinematic thing where it was like you were kind of going up and starting the glide and all that. And I was just ready to let it take me. But before I know it, I'm like nose diving to the ground. And like I ended up right on a treasure chest that I hadn't been to before. I'm like, oh, cool. But then found out that like, yeah, the end of that music cue still played because it took me a while to get back home. So I thought you'd be amused by that story. But yeah, that's what I've been up to.
Not bad. That's awesome.
Some quick composer follow-up headlines. We missed talking about it last week because I think it just happened like as we were releasing the episode, not as we recorded. But Atlas finally delivered on Spotify. The Persona franchise and Catherine OSTs are now available on Spotify and Apple Music. So, I mean, gosh, what's been added to the Spotify playlist there, Joe?
So we now have Persona 3, Persona 4, Persona 5, Persona Q, Persona Q2 from the Best of 2019 episode, one song from Ultimax, because Ultimax is on there, but not Arena, which we found out was because there's a different distribution company in charge of Arena's soundtrack. It's weird. And also Catherine.
Yeah. So a whole bunch of music there now on the Spotify playlist. Definitely check that out.
In other news for people, well, not really news, just a revelation that that I had. For those of you like me who have fallen deep down the HoloLive VTuber rabbit hole, you might know the name Inugami Karone, who is one of the more popular ones. She's the dog girl. You've probably seen her screaming at Super Mario Brothers or being way, way too excited about finding the chainsaw in Doom 2016.
Or Ikambokum.
Actually, yeah, that's probably the one you know. It's Ikambokum. A tweet went out yesterday from Family Jules Conroy, who we have used for the transition pieces quite often, saying that he was releasing a new arrangement of a song for Karone. And I was like, that's a weird crossover. And then Yuzo Koshiro, who we have talked about for his work on ActRaiser, quote tweeted Family Jewels post. And then when I sent that to Matt revealed to me that Yuzo Koshiro made her background music. What? So apparently he's doing music for Karone. That's bizarre to know.
So yeah, a little bit of a revelation there, and these composers, how they're still busy working on things even outside of video games. Speaking outside of video games, Megan McDuffie, we've talked about her work on River City Girls, and we talked about Jim Dooley last week for his work on Epic Mickey. Well, Megan McDuffie collaborated with Jim Dooley in order to have her music featured on the newest trailer for the 2021 horror film Wrong Turn. So it's just a weird little tweet mashup of her shouting out and thanking Jim Dooley and those who helped get her music on this trailer. And it's, you know what? Great to see composers coming together.
Also, the timeliest this could have possibly been, because I'm pretty sure that was like the day after the Epic Mickey episode went out.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just good to see these kind of headlines starting to pop up now that 2021 has started.
And speaking of started, I don't have a segue here. I tried to do something clever. Didn't work. Whatever. It's fine. Roll with it. Let's talk about our first game being Professor Layton versus Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney, which I'm only going to refer to now as Versus because saying that entire title makes my mouth tie into knots. So, It was originally released for the Nintendo 3DS in Japan on November 29th, 2012. And then the West would have to wait almost 2 full years before we even saw the game at all. It would not see a Western release until it came out in Europe and Australia on March 28th and 29th of 2014. And in North America, we would have to wait even longer because our release wouldn't happen until August 29th, 2014. It was developed by Level 5 and Capcom and published by Level 5 in Japan. Nintendo published it worldwide. It is a crossover game between Level 5's Professor Layton and Capcom's Ace Attorney. I'm sure you already realized that, considering the name of the game is literally that. But, it never hurts to be a little thorough and point those things out. Gameplay is essentially a near-perfect fusion of the two games' playstyles. Investigation sections basically play like a Layton game, complete with the series' signature logic puzzles and hint coins and all that stuff. Meanwhile, the other half of gameplay is spent in Ace Attorney-style trials, where the player must logic out a case that will prove the defendant innocent while finding the true perpetrator of the crime. So, while the Layton sections are basically the same as what you'd find in Layton games, a big difference can be found during the trials. The trials add a whole bunch to the normal Ace Attorney formula. Normally in an Ace Attorney game, you cross-examine one witness at a time. But not in this game, because this one features mob trials or mass inquisitions, where the player must cross-examine multiple witnesses at once. I think like up to 5 is the highest it goes.
That sounds right, yeah.
The story of this strange crossover is, in London, a young girl named Espella Cantabella seeks the assistance of Professor Herschel Layton and his apprentice Luke Triton. Upon trying to help, the three are attacked by witches, and Espella is forced to escape on a freighter. She leaves behind a book called the Historia Labyrinthia, and this book appears to draw Layton and Luke into another world. Meanwhile, Phoenix Wright and his assistant Maya Fey travel to London as part of a legal exchange program and wind up representing Espella after she is accused of assault and theft by the freighter's crew. After proving her innocence, they too find Espella's book and also find themselves drawn into the other world as well. This world is the medieval town of Labyrinthia, a world where witches are a constant threat. The witches are caught and tried by the Knights of the Inquisition, who then execute said witches by fire. The town itself is controlled by a mysterious man known as the Storyteller, a being who can seemingly make anything he writes a reality. Can our unlikely team bring logic to the superstitious people of Labyrinthia? What is the town and the Storyteller hiding? And what is the goal of the witch's leader, the great witch Bezella? And this is where I will ask, Peter, what are your experiences with Professor Layton versus Phoenix Wright?
Professor Layton versus Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney was a game concept that was, I believe, announced late 2010 or so, to the point when I was hosting my very first ever convention panel in November 2010, and I was talking about it as it was a news story that came out, and so like, oh yeah, I can't wait for that. Both great franchises, can't wait to see them come together. And then yeah, we'd have to wait almost 4 years in the United States. Just crazy anticipation for that game. Love these two franchises. To see them come together in such a fantastic way was so good. But unfortunately, it was a game where, thinking back on it, I had to look up the plot because I remember like the big twist of the game, but I forgot names. I, see a character's name like Darklaw, and I'm like, sounds familiar. I can't picture who this is. And then you look at like, oh, and then everything like comes back like, yeah, obviously I've seen that character. I played that game. So like, it's a great adventure. It has memorable character interactions, a fantastic soundtrack. I mean, my goodness, we've been dying to bring this game to the show for a long time. Mm-hmm. But a game where certain plot elements and characters I've forgotten about. So like, I need to play it again at some point.
See, it's really funny that you mentioned that because that's actually kind of been my exact experience with your game this week. So we share that. That's really interesting, actually. I absolutely adore Professor Layton versus Phoenix Wright. It might be my favorite Layton game, just narrowly beating out Unwound Future. I don't think it's my favorite Ace Attorney game. I think Trials and Tribulations still has that pretty hard on lock, but I think it's up there. I think that all of the things that Level 5 added to the Ace Attorney side is fantastic. And to be honest, coming out of this game, my first reaction was, okay, so let Level 5 make the next Ace Attorney, please. Because they made the best Ace Attorney in years. Also the first Ace Attorney in years. Because I believe this was a couple years, like multiple years after Apollo Justice.
I mean, you're right. I mean, Dual Destinies was 2013. That's a really good point. Wow.
Yeah, Dual Destinies came out after this game in Japan, which is kind of bizarre to think about.
Wow.
But yeah, it's such an interesting game. You don't get a lot of crossovers like this in video games. For the most part, the crossovers you'll see are like fighting games, where it's like Crossover Fighters, Marvel vs. Capcom, that kind of thing. But you don't usually see like two point-and-click adventure mystery franchises that are then just sort of shoved together, and they work really well, like very well. It's my favorite crossover game pretty much ever made, and I wish we could get a sequel, but we'll never get a sequel.
Yeah, you're right. We'll never get a sequel, and I think that's what makes it so special. It makes us want to have the game's legacy continue on Switch. That'd be fantastic. And I think it's important to note, just when you talk about how so many crossovers are superficial, this one is so deep and it works so well because what the games bring to the combined project is the strength of each game. Professor Layton games are strongest in their investigation, exploring the town, finding and solving puzzles phase. It's a cutscene when it comes to the big accusations and like delivering the point home. Ace Attorney games are at their weakest when you're kind of exploring and looking for clues, but they're strongest in the courtroom and accusation phase. So to take those two aspects and blend them into a game, it's the best of both worlds.
And you know what? I wish that the two Ace Attorneys that came out after this kept hint coins. Because you can use them in trials in this game, and I wish they kept that. Anyways, let's get into the development of the project itself. So apparently, this whole concept was actually the idea of Level 5 CEO Akihiro Hino, who was supposedly a massive fan of Ace Attorney. In fact, he had even multiple times challenged the producer of the Layton series, Jun Suzuki, to, quote, produce something on par with Ace Attorney. So, dude loved Phoenix Wright. Dude loved Ryusuke Naruhodo.
Yeah.
I suppose that would be what he would know it as. When the idea was taken to Ace Attorney producer Shu Takumi, Keiji Inafune, the head of Capcom's R&D management at the time, claimed that he was, quote, 80% certain Takumi would refuse the idea. But apparently, Hino was eventually able to talk Takumi into the project, mostly, it seems, by offering to let him be the game's main scenario writer. So he accepted the project, and unlike most crossover games of this kind, where the norm is one company licenses the property from the other in order to use their characters, think like Kingdom Hearts. Square Enix is allowed to put Disney characters in Kingdom Hearts, and Disney doesn't overall nowadays have a huge amount of like involvement in the development of Kingdom Hearts, though 3, I guess they did have their animators on it, but that's really about it. So Square does not own Disney, they just licensed out the characters, and that's how it usually goes. Same with Marvel vs. Capcom. Marvel has nothing to do with the development of those games. But in this case, it became an entire joint effort between both the Layton team at Level 5 and the Ace Attorney development team at Capcom, with Capcom handling the visual design and scenario writing, while Level 5 served as the publisher and handled the game's script. And that's really cool. Like, they have quotes about how they didn't feel like this game was going to work unless it was all hands on deck from both sides. And I think it worked out super well. In terms of visual design, speaking of, The team went through a lengthy trial and error process to find an art style that would be a good mix of Ace Attorney's anime-style characters and Layton's more flat cartoon characters, which are two styles that you would think wouldn't really mesh super well together. Layton and Phoenix look like they're from different games, and that's because they are. But this is the first game, by the way, to feature a fully voiced Phoenix Wright and Maya Fey, but only in Japan because, due to taking so long to get this game to us, Dual Destinies actually came out a full year before it, which also features a fully voiced Phoenix Wright. But in Japan, both characters are played by the actors who played them in the 2012 live-action film, being Hiroki Naramiya playing Phoenix and Mirei Kiritani playing Maya.
Which is a great live-action film if you're a fan of the Ace Attorney franchise. Owe it to yourself to see it. I did not know that. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's a very goofy movie. They do not shy away from any of the dumb stuff in Ace Attorney, and it's great. So, rumors had actually begun circulating that Capcom was working with Level 5 on a game when Inafune happened to mention the company's CEO in his interview for a Japanese business magazine called Diamond. And this speculation then boiled over, which I think you might remember this, when Level 5's Jiro Ishii accidentally replied to a tweet by a Square Enix developer in a tweet that said, quote, "Huh? Oh, Gyakuten XX. I'm making it with Mr. Takumi."
Oops.
This tweet was very quickly walked back, and Ishii claimed any conclusions the internet had come to was a misunderstanding, but at that point it was too late. The fires were already lit. This, of course, led to rampant rumors and speculation for a few months that Level 5 was doing something involving Ace Attorney, and the only guesses people really had were either that Level 5 was handling Ace Attorney 5, or a crossover with their mystery game franchise was coming. The game was officially unveiled in October of 2010, so you're right, latter half of 2010, at Level 5's Vision press conference with a fully animated trailer. I don't know if you remember this trailer. None of those scenes are in the final game, which probably meant that the game had basically not even begun production yet. I always think back to a scene where, like, Phoenix and Maya are sitting at a fountain, and Phoenix says, "I don't know if I trust that top hat guy." Those lines are never spoken in the entirety of the game. That scenario never happens. They're on the same team from minute one. And it's really weird to think that there, like, Espella shows up in that trailer and a lot of, like, beats that are in the story do, but just small scenes, this never happen. When that game was revealed, I don't know if you remember this, but I need to throw somebody under the bus. I'm not going to name them. But on the SMYN forums back in the day, when this game was announced, we had somebody that we knew who went on a full diatribe about how this game was going to suck. And one of his examples for why it was going to suck was that Ace Attorney has a flawless music record, but Layton is going to ruin that because Layton doesn't have a good music record, which that the first part isn't true because hot take, the Justice for All soundtrack isn't very good. And B,
since when is Layton a terrible soundtrack?
Yeah, that's B. Layton has fantastic soundtracks, and it was most likely he had just never played any Layton games.
Yes.
But both points in that argument are nonsense and not true. Anyways, when they announced the game, they weren't saying anything about whether or not the game would actually leave Japan. In 2011, Level 5 put out a survey to see which Japan-only games international players wanted to see the most, and Versus won with over 6,000 votes. And then for a few years, rumors flew here and there about a potential Western release, and Hino even hinted at a localization in 2013, but then this was quickly corrected to say that there was nothing confirmed. And then, finally, on August 7th, 2013, the game's English localization was announced in a Nintendo Direct. The North American release is actually the exact same as the European localization, which is kind of a big deal because this is the first game to be released in North America that features Maria Darling as Luke instead of our Luke, who is usually played by Nancy Drew herself, Lanny Minella.
And Lanny Minella has so many other voice acting roles. She's many characters in the Super Smash Brothers games, but gosh, I honestly think no, Lanny Minella was still even on Azran Legacy.
This was specifically just because I guess they didn't want to pay to localize one character in this game. I don't know. It's weird. The game was received favorably upon release. It currently sits at a 79 on Metacritic. Many critics pointed to the story as being good, as well as the music and overall gameplay experience being very, very well done. One critic from Wired noted that he felt the game had missed an opportunity by not including more than 2 members of each series cast in the story. Because, outside of an appearance by Chelmy at the very beginning, Layton, Luke, Phoenix, and Maya are the only people that appear in that game, except for, I guess at the very, very end, Miles Edgeworth shows up for 10 seconds?
Right, yeah.
And that's literally it. So there's no appearances by Flora, there's no Emmy, Don Paolo, Descalay, Mia Fey, Pearl Fey. None of those characters show up in this game whatsoever.
Also, it's not entirely clear where this game takes place in either canon, so for some of those characters, it might be understandable why they don't show up.
Yeah, but I don't think I fully agree with that criticism. I think it was the right decision to dump them both in a completely unfamiliar scenario. So neither one of them have an advantage over the other in terms of who they know or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
That review called characters boring and uninspired. I don't think that's wrong to say because like you, I don't remember a lot of the side characters' names. I am actually have been struggling to remember the name of the main prosecutor.
Zacharias Barnum. Don't worry, yeah. I had to wiki him up as well.
Yeah, I couldn't remember his name to save my life. So maybe there's something to that. I don't know. But overall, I think not including huge swaths of either game's casts was the right choice.
Well, and really the highlight is to focus on the interaction between Layton and Luke and Phoenix and Maya. That's the goal. Any more and you start muddling it.
Mm-hmm. It didn't win any awards, but it was nominated for a few, including Handheld Game of the Year at the Golden Joystick Awards, as well as Art Direction, Period Influence, and Writing in a Comedy at the Navigator Awards, where also Christopher Robin Miller and Trevor White were nominated for Performance in a Comedy Lead. Those are the voice actors for Professor Layton and Phoenix Wright, respectively. The two studios have not collaborated on a game between these two series since. I wish they would, but I don't expect them to, and that's fine. This game works perfectly well as its own standalone thing. Layton would go on to star in one more game for the 3DS, which happens to be the other game we'll be talking about this week, and Nick would return to the courtroom 1 year later in 2013's Dual Destinies. So, in terms of the composer we're going to highlight for this, his name is Yasumasa Kitagawa. I don't have a lot on him. He has apparently been in the industry since 1997. He started out at Konami and then eventually moved from there into Capcom. He has released original work under the alias Mew. That's M-Y-U.
Tilde?
Tilde. The squirrely, the squiggly, the tilde, that thing. All lowercase, too. And he has also been credited in some games under the name of Yasuaki Kitagawa. So, he's also apparently a member of the unit Rockmen alongside Masahiro Aoki, who we have talked about for his work on Street Fighter V. In terms of discography, he did multiple games in the Goemon series while he was over at Konami. He is credited as being the original arranger for the Japanese version of Across the Border in Tatsuno vs. Capcom. He did the music for Resident Evil The Mercenaries 3D, unfortunately for him. He did EX Troopers, Professor Layton vs. Phoenix Wright, obviously. He appears to be the lead composer on both Dai Gyakuten Saibon games.
which maybe we'll get localizations of those soon.
Fingers crossed. But yeah, I didn't realize that they had a different composer. So that's kind of neat. And I think he mainly ended up on those games because of his work on Versus. He is also credited as one of the composers on Mega Man 11, and he is credited on various Mega Man anniversary and best of albums where he has done various arrangements of various songs. So he's really well in there at Capcom. So I didn't find nothing, but I also didn't find a lot. In terms of historical development research, the soundtrack was, much like the rest of the game, a collaboration between Kitagawa from the Capcom side and Layton composer Tomohito Nishiura, who we talked about back when Peter brought Unwound Future to the show. Nishiura handled the Layton side while Kitagawa handled the Ace Attorney side, as one might expect. But in terms of orchestrated music that would be used in cutscenes, they both worked together, and they were orchestrated with the help of Yumiko Hashizume and Norihito Sumitomo, and this music was performed by the Layton Grand Caravan Orchestra. The game also features many arrangements of music from both series, with Kitagawa in charge of arranging the original compositions of Masakazu Sugimori in the first Ace Attorney. And the game got an official soundtrack release, spread across 3 discs. One disc contains all the Layton-related tracks, one contains the Ace Attorney-related tracks, and the third one contains music from the animated cutscenes. Alright, what does this game sound like? Let's get into it, because, oh man, I've been waiting to talk about this game for a real long time. Our first track on the Critical 5 is the opening theme of Professor Layton versus Ace Attorney. This is the song that plays on the title screen. It is composed by Tomohito Nishiura, and it's one of the songs performed by the Layton Grand Caravan Orchestra. This is a hell of an opening piece.
Mm-hmm.
It's so good. It starts really low-key, very Layton style, and then just erupts into this intense orchestral piece that honestly might be one of my favorite songs from either series. It's just so good. But also, it's not in the clip, but near the end of the song, there's a part where there's sort of a really cool duet between Phoenix's Objection theme and the Layton theme. It's so cool. It's the best thing. Like, this song is yet another song that makes me wish I was smart enough to keep my violin so I could pick it up again. It's just so good.
Yeah, what a fantastic opening theme. And you're right from the beginning, with the music box and the violin, it has a really nice, and it's Layton-like, but then the fanfare of an Ace Attorney game comes in, and that's, what you hear here. Just a great piece, and I think if you're talking about the fusion between 2 franchises, 2 worlds, you really get excited to play this game, and the orchestration here is very representative of what's going to happen throughout the score, and gives it an epic scale. It's a great sense for a crossover.
Yeah, it's just, I love this song so much. I think it might actually be my favorite song in the game. Meanwhile, for critical track number 2, let's get a little more specialized with Puzzles 8. As you might guess, this is the puzzle theme when you are doing, Layton puzzles. It was composed by Tomohito Nishiura, and it might be my favorite puzzle theme in the Layton franchise, honestly. It's this nice, calming music box duet with a piano, a little string backing. It's very calming, in my opinion. I've heard some criticize it for being a little too busy for a puzzle theme in comparison to the rest of the Layton franchise's puzzle themes.
What?
I disagree, but I guess I can kind of see where they're coming from a little bit. But I absolutely adore this piece.
I agree. I think it's one of my favorites as far as a puzzle theme goes. The instrument choice is perfect for the kind of magical sense that they represent here with the witches and all in the story, and the sense of the music box with the piano being the real driving factor, the strings coming under it. It's flawless, I think. I struggle to think of a puzzle theme that I like more than this. I think you're right.
Yeah, I think the original puzzle theme is close.
It's a classic. It's a classic for sure. Yeah.
But this one buries it. It's so good. For critical track number 3, it's actually 2 songs, being Mass Inquisition Moderato and Allegro. So these are the mob cross-examination themes composed by Yasumasa Kitagawa. In typical Ace Attorney fashion, Moderato is of course used near the beginning of the trial. Things are a little bit calm. You're just trying to poke at a few loose ends and see what comes out. But then, when everything gets more intense near the end of the trial, Allegro starts jumping in. And I think this, again, might be one of my favorite cross-examination themes in the Ace Attorney series. I think Trials and Tribulations beats it out, because, God, that one is so good. But this one really gives it a run for its money, I think. Allegro, especially, I really, really enjoy. I think of all the courtroom songs, this is the one that most feels like it fuses that Layton flair into it with the accordions and all that.
Yeah.
And it definitely feels like a song that is meant to be both styles sort of smashing together. And it really has this kind of chaotic energy, the Allegro one, that I think really does a good job at reflecting how kind of hectic the mob inquisitions are and how much fun they are. And I absolutely adore both of these pieces.
I think that's a really astute observation, actually, because if I remember correctly, a lot of the mob characters are, how to put it, Layton-like in their design, how they look, some of their eccentricities. So I think that's really smart to pick up on the accordion coming in. I mean, we've always mentioned like that's the one instrument that's definitively Layton, and for it to be a big infusion there of the instruments, that's a really good call.
Yeah, for the most part, I believe the witnesses are almost always Layton style because they're generally the people you're going to meet out on the street. And most of those characters are designed to fit in Layton style. Meanwhile, like the prosecutors and the judge and the storyteller, those are all very much Ace Attorney style designs. And Espella herself is also an Ace Attorney character, pretty much.
Yes.
And it just blends perfectly together. And this song is a great homage to that fact. So, critical track number 4, we're going to get even more intense with Pursuit Casting Magic. This was, of course, composed by Yasumasa Kitagawa once more, and this game's corner theme is so good. This is, of course, an Ace Attorney tradition. The song that plays when you got him. you have them. You have them backed into a corner, and it's time to land that final blow. Everything is going great. You know the case is going very well and is starting to get close to the end when this song starts playing, because you just landed some real decisive evidence. So the thing is, like, with all of the Pursuit themes in the Ace Attorney series, they're all, like, intense and hype. But I think this one adds more of, like, an epic flavor to it. And it's meant to fit with the different type of setting. Phoenix Wright is not usually known to be presenting evidence in a witch trial in a medieval town. And I think this really fits it together. And I think it doesn't really reach the heights of, like, a lot of the other Pursuit themes in the games. But hot damn, this one just does a really good job, especially with that organ and the orchestra combo with it. It's so good. It's a really good listen.
I think it's important to note that some of these tracks have different titles depending on where you look. I don't think there was an official English translation based on the official soundtrack release, so it's sometimes hit or miss. So Puzzles 8 you sometimes hear as Bewitching Puzzles. For this one, sometimes you hear it as Pursuit Spellbreaker. But I've always known it as Casting Magic, so I think for certain sources, I think that this is the right way to go. Also, one of my favorite Pursuit themes, which is odd to say that, like, it's the crossover that gets, some of the better ones, but wow, I feel like it's the extra orchestration that really helps it, and the energy is infectious in this one. You don't have, like, the big bass of, like, a Game Boy Advance DS sort of sound chip going for it, but the full swell of everything is right there. And yeah, this is a great Pursuit theme, and a very iconic piece for representing this game as a whole. Had to put it here.
It's really weird that almost all of these Critical Fives, at least one of us has been like, this is one of my favorite songs in that series. And like, it's just so crazy that this game exists in the state that it's in.
Well, and I think it's also more telling that, like, we've both been itching to talk about this game on the show for a long time.
That's also true. So let's get into critical check number 5. It's The Great Witch's Judgment. Court begins. Once more composed by Yasumasa Kitagawa, it is the intro to the final trial, where you're going to find out who is the Great Witch Bezella. We'll probably have something where we talk about this in more detail, but this trial has probably one of the coolest moments in either series, and I absolutely love it, and I get really excited when it happens. And if you've played the game, you probably might know what I'm talking about. It's just so good. I believe they name the chapter after it because it's so cool. And I think this song just does a good job of bringing out, like, this magical and intense setting of Labyrinthia's witch trials. Because, like, you are talking about magic spells being used and all that kind of thing. And I don't know, it comes out of nowhere to really drive home that, like, this is it. This is the last trial. That being said, I think this is the most straight up Ace Attorney style song on this Critical 5. This sounds like something I would have heard in, like, Spirit of Justice.
Yeah, especially for the more recent Gyakuten Saiban games, for sure. So you get the opening court opens theme for most of the other trials, and it has this kind of sound, I guess, but this one just turns it way up and it punches you in the face, and it's a real memorable piece if you've played the game. I think it definitely represents the dark witch magic sort of theme really well. And as the piece even continues, like, some of the instruments that get brought in, or like the percussion that almost sounds like, it's not like the horse clopping, but like the like, striking wood in a way. Like, there's the one percussion bit there. Really, really cool stuff going on here. And this is a piece that really stands out to me. So I'm glad it's here.
Yeah. So, in terms of tracks on the cutting room floor, Peter, you got 2. Hit me.
All right, so we got to go with this one. Even though it's a classic Ace Attorney theme, I just love how it got turned up for this one. This is Phoenix Wright, Objection 2012. Yeah, you know, that classic Objection theme. Da, 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 da. I love how you've got the big orchestra swell here, and then even in the piece where it drops out. And it's the bop, 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 and it builds right up to another huge swell. That's almost like a counter B melody. I love what they did with this version. It's such a classic, iconic piece that represents Phoenix Wright's character, but the respect that they gave this one, it's just so good. And I know we got to eventually talk about Professor Layton's theme, one of the most legendary character themes in all of video games. If you ask me, it's not going to be here. Don't worry, we're going to save it for when we talk about Curious Village eventually. But I feel like while they did a great version of that theme in this game as well, they kept it pretty close to the vest as far as like close to the original. This one, I think they went all in with Phoenix's theme, and it shows.
The only reason this isn't on the Critical 5 is because it is just a rearrangement, and I wanted to focus on the original stuff. But yeah, no, this is like the best version of this song that has ever been arranged. It's so good.
The other piece on the cutting room floor that I will bring here is Seal Locked Away Darkness. While the Objection piece was the original composition by Masakazu Sugimori, arranged by Yasumasa Kitagawa, Kitagawa composes this one as an original for this Versus game, and woo, brings up the dark magic vibes hard for sure. For me, it's like between this one and the Great Witch's Trial that really kind of shows off this theming, but with the harpsichord and like the dark choral stuff going on here, it's just a cool theme of like, bad things are going down. Like the villains are getting their chance, their strike in. A new twist and turn in the trial.
Yeah, it's quite good. The organ really, really makes it.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
For me, I also have 2 songs on the cutting room floor. The first one being Logic and Baroque. This was once again composed by Yasumasa Kitagawa. Look, we really fell heavily on the Ace Attorney side of this soundtrack, but it's not our fault that that's where all the best songs live. This is this game's equivalent to Logic and Trick from the Ace Attorney series. This usually plays when something's being explained in the case. I love harpsichord. We don't get it very often in video games, and it's used to really great effect in this song, I think.
And then you add the music box into it with the strings. It's the perfect instrument set that they nailed for this game, and it's lighter, kind of sparse throughout here, but still so good.
Mm-hmm. And other than that, the direct opposite of lighter, let's talk about Announce the Truth 2012. Once again composed by Yasumasa Kitagawa, this is another of the traditional Ace Attorney pieces being Announce the Truth, which is usually it's like a middle ground between objection and cornered, usually. You've revealed a newly learned fact to the court, and this might be the thing that really corners somebody and gets them to change their story. It's got more harpsichord to it. It's got really good organ. It's just a really good piece. I love this piece.
And that fat, deep brass coming in, too. Love it.
So what will I never forget about Professor Layton versus Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney? I have to replay this game. I really have to replay this game. I've actually kind of been meaning to for years, and I just haven't gotten around to it. Maybe this is the year I finally replay this game. It might be one of my favorite soundtracks on the 3DS. That's putting it up with, like, Kid Icarus, which is, that's a hell of a competition right there. But I think it is by far the best crossover game I've ever played. That's not like a fighting game.
It's special. I need to replay it as well. And hearing some of these pieces and memories they go back to also just makes me very fond of this game, and need to dig out my 3DS for sure.
I want it on Switch so I can play it on a TV. This is all I ask. Level 5, my demands. Make it happen. I also just really love the mob cross-examinations. I think they're just a ton of fun. They're a great breath of fresh air in what is generally like a pretty done-out formula that is the cross-examinations of Ace Attorney. Not to say that those are bad, but like this one gives just enough variety that it's just a lot of fun. And also, I'll never forget that I once wrote an audio skit for SMYN's old Game of the Year show based on this game, and I think it's probably still the best pre-written thing I've ever done.
I also think of that a lot as well, especially revisiting some of these pieces and thinking about their comparisons and use in that project. That was a real good one. I agree.
So, for our transition, we usually like to cover a fan remix or cover. It could be from YouTube. It could be from OC Remix. You never know where it's going to come from. I found a cover of the opening theme by YouTuber Lorenzo de Sequeira featuring Austin Eruption on drums. It is a cover of the opening theme, a rock cover. And this song translates weirdly well into rock. Wouldn't have expected that, but hey, here we are. So please enjoy that. We'll be right back.
Let's talk about another Professor Layton game. But, this one he's not crossing over with Ace Attorney. This is his final game. Professor Layton and the Azran Legacy is the last game of the Professor Layton prequel trilogy. So the way that games go when they star Professor Herschel Layton is that you have the original 3, which are Curious Village, Diabolical Box, Unwound, or Lost Future. And then there is a trilogy that is set as prequels. So think almost like Star Wars. There's a prequel trilogy. And then it goes The Last Spectre, Miracle Mask, and now the Azran Legacy. So Azran Legacy that we'll cover today is essentially the Revenge of the Sith, if you will. And oddly enough, it follows directly into the very first installment of Curious Village. So, Reiton Kyoju to Chobunme e no Isan, or Professor Layton and the Legacy of Super Civilization A, was released in Japan for Nintendo 3DS on February 28th, 2013. Professor Layton and the Azran Legacy came to Australia and Europe on November 8th and 9th, 2013. North America would also, like the Versus game, wait a little while to get this localization to the States. It would actually be released a full year after the Japanese release, so February 28th, 2014. The game is also developed by Level 5, and it's published by Level 5 in Japan. Also, Nintendo published the game everywhere else. So you gotta think that they were kind of developing these two games side by side over at level 5. If in Japan, November 2012 is when the Versus game came out, February 2013 is when the Layton game came out. That's just an interesting thing to note, I guess.
Very close to each other. That's quite interesting. I didn't actually know that.
I feel like we picked these games because we've been really dying to talk about them, but didn't think they'd be as similar as we might have thought. As we kind of mentioned, a Professor Layton game is a point-and-click adventure game where word, logic, and math puzzles must be solved to progress the story further. It's a game that excels with, exploring different environments, talking to people, discovering puzzles to be solved, solving those puzzles to continue the adventure. The plot of Azran Legacy involves Professor Herschel Layton, his assistant Emmy Altava, and assistant in training Luke Triton receiving a letter from Professor Desmond Sycamore, who is an eminent archaeologist, who tells Layton that he has found a so-called living mummy. This would be Aurora, a girl frozen in ice who has knowledge of the ancient Azran civilization. In order to open an ancient Azran chamber and access its secrets, 5 eggs from around the world must be collected, all while the nefarious criminal organization Targent and its leader Leon Bronev are hot on Layton's tail. What are Targent's motivations? What is the Azran Legacy? And what happens when the chamber is opened? Joe Israel will ask you, what are our experiences with Professor Layton and the Azran Legacy?
Like I alluded to earlier, my experience with Azran Legacy is very close to your experience with Versus, being I didn't really remember a lot of it until I was reminded about certain plot beats and stuff by my roommate. I played it at launch. Yeah, I don't remember a lot from it, except for some of the ending twists and all that.
And boy, do they throw those ending twists at you. It's kind of amazing how much they throw at you at the end. I also played this game at launch, and I feel like the game may be at the top, if not near the top, of my 3DS play statistics, because I started the game. I maybe took 2 or 3 breaks in which I hit, a suspend state. And so I think the 3DS thinks I played this game in one full sitting, only opened the software once and played the whole thing 28 hours or whatever it was. And I burned through it. I maybe played it in 2 or 3 days.
Sleep is for the weak when you're solving puzzles.
When you're ending the Herschel Layton story, I mean, honestly, it was a game where going into it, I remember the big question was, well, he has his assistant, Emmy Altava, and she's not in the original trilogy. She's gonna die, right? Emmy's gonna die. I don't want Emmy to die, but is that the only way? Does she die? You'll just have to play the game to find out what happens. We love this series so much, and I miss Herschel Layton games.
Yeah, me too. I don't think we'll ever get another one, though.
I think you're right, unfortunately. Well, that's where you can play the old ones on mobile devices, like iPads and things like that. So, in Azran Legacy, there are 150 puzzles in the main story, but then you get 500 more with extra challenges and daily puzzles and things like that. Apparently, in order to promote the game further in Japan, there were 2 sets of Professor Layton themed chocolate that were sold. Each box contains a special card containing a puzzle, as well as a code to unlock that puzzle in the game. And the chocolate comes in 2 flavors, Gâteau Chocolat and black tea chiffon cake.
Okay.
That's about as much as I found on the development of Azran Legacy. Honestly, it's weird to see how little there was, or the little fanfare there was about the release of this game that ended the Professor Layton games. There were 6 of these things on DS and 3DS, and it's did people just not care at the end? I know they weren't big, bombastic, big sellers, but you feel like there had to have been more care and more, research that went into how these games were made. I don't know. It's a little disappointing, I think.
If I remember correctly, didn't you find a good amount on Unwound Future? I don't actually remember now that I'm saying it.
I think looking back on the outline, it was even shorter than this was, to be honest.
That is bizarre.
I think we were gushing more about like our memories with the game and the music. And, granted, for our show to be about the soundtrack, I think that is what's most important. But the similar problem with Unwound Future, I mean, there's not much out there about Layton development history. Well, Professor Layton and the Azran Legacy reviewed favorably well with a Metacritic average of 81. I think some reviewers were basically saying that like it doesn't take too many risks if you think about it. It's really similar in a lot of ways for how it plays to Miracle Mask, which was the previous game also on 3DS. You can explore 3D environments and you can zoom into places to touch and probe for hint coins and things like that. Go figure. And it also kind of lulls a little bit in the middle of the story. When you're collecting these eggs and you have to go to 5 locations around the world, it's a big globe-trotting adventure. But you have like these little mini mysteries. It kind of lulls and you kind of stalls a little bit of the pacing for the main exciting plot. So I feel like those are kind of the flaws there. But I mean, it's a Professor Layton game. You're there for the puzzles. You're there for the characters. It's a solid entry overall. That said, not really any awards, just like Professor Layton versus Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney. And the Legacy, this like the Azran Legacy, this is the last main series game with Professor Herschel Layton as the protagonist. As you mentioned, a little game came out 6 months later in North America called Professor Layton versus Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney. So it was a big year for Layton, 2 games in 2014, but that's really been it since. You had Layton Brothers Mystery Room on mobile, which was an attempted kind of spin-off and then more of a spiritual sequel successor of Layton's Mystery Journey, Catriel and the Millionaire's Conspiracy on mobile, 3DS, and Switch, which came out within the last few years, different ports here and there. So for Catriel Layton to be Herschel Layton's adopted daughter, I guess there's some way that the legacy lives on. These kind of games live on, but man, we miss Herschel as the protagonist. You named your cat after Herschel.
Yeah, the cat's named after Professor Layton. I wish that made him as smart as Professor Layton, but unfortunately it actually just made him dumb as a box of rocks. But we are both big fans of Layton in this apartment, so when it came to figuring out a name for our cat, Herschel just seemed like the best place to go. I have dabbled into both of the spin-offs. Layton Brothers is the one I remember the least because I played it on mobile because the first chapter I think was free.
Yeah.
I remember it having the stupidest clue I've ever seen in a mystery game, and that's saying something because we just finished talking about an Ace Attorney game. But Layton's Mystery Journey is pretty all right. I enjoyed the time that I put into it. I need to get back to it. I keep meaning to. But Catriel is very cute, and she's a fun protagonist. But yeah, just nobody's ever going to be able to hold a candle to Herschel Layton. It's just how it goes.
There's something about his gentleman debonair style.
And the fact that he has literally no fear whatsoever.
In those cold, dead eyes. When it comes to the composer for Professor Layton and the Azran Legacy, all of the music is composed by Tomohito Nishiura. As you mentioned, Joe, we talked about him in our Unbound Future episode. So where do we go from here? We talk about the singer who is present in the Japanese version of the credits theme. And that is Miho Fukuhara. Miho Fukuhara was born on June 19th, 1987 in Sapporo, Japan. She originally signed to the independent, local Sapporo-based Yumechika Records label in 2006, and she released her debut single and mini-album titled The Roots and Step Out, respectively. She then performed in-store live performances to promote her records, which caught the attention of Sony Music Japan, who then picked her up as a performing artist. Her big single seems to be titled Change, and it was number 92 on the Billboard Japan Hot 100 Singles year-end charts in 2008. I most recognize her voice, and some of you may as well, she's also known for performing Let It Out, which ended up being used as the second ending theme in the anime Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. Yeah, I came across that, and it's like, oh, yeah. Okay, now I know. Now I know who Fukuhara is. She has also performed with different musical artists, especially on her third album, which features a song performed alongside Leona Lewis. In early 2013, it was announced that Fukuhara signed on to be the newest frontwoman of the worldwide pop music project Sweetbox. I've never heard of Sweetbox, but that's quite a name. She parted ways with Sony Music Japan in 2014 to become an independent musician, and in 2015 she set up her own record label, Happy Field Records. Interesting trivia that her voice is apparently classified as spinto lirico soprano, which verges into lyric soprano, apparently with a 3-octave vocal range from a low C3 up to high D6, which, yeah, that's impressive. Her discography involves 3 studio albums, with Rainbow from 2008, Music Is My Life from 2010, and The Best of Soul Extreme from 2012. She also has 6 EPs, 5 video albums, and numerous singles.
Can I just say that those 3 are a roller coaster of emotion? It's from Rainbow to Music Is My Life to The Best of Soul Extreme.
And just like very, I don't know, like English titles, if you were. I don't know. It's certainly something. This is another example of when I'm doing research for a musician, something for this show, where their video game work is not even mentioned on like their Wikipedia article. Brought me back to our Murder by Numbers episode, where I did research for Rod Thomas or Bright Light, Bright Light. And it's like, oh, his Wikipedia doesn't even mention his Murder by Numbers work. Same thing here. You know, Miho Fukuhara, no reference to performing the credits theme in Professor Layton and the Azran Legacy, but okay. As I said, the Azran Legacy soundtrack, composed by Tomohito Nishiura. This song is called Surely Someday, the game's ending theme, the credits theme. The Japanese version has Miho Fukuhara performing a vocal part of the song. It's a vocal piece, but internationally something must have happened with rights or something like that, because at least in the United States, we got an instrumental version where an oboe carries the melody of what Fukuhara would otherwise perform.
I believe they're all like that, aren't they? Like Time Travel's like that too.
Yeah, it seems to be the case, at least with the Layton games. I'm not entirely sure why. I'm sure licensing plays a factor there. But she was a notable artist at the time, so it feels like Level 5 did like get a good pull as far as a Japanese artist here, because in 2014, Fukuhara was chosen as one of the top 10 voices in Japan through a poll on a popular TV program. So a notable performing artist, at least at the time when this game at least was close to coming out, or just after it came out. What does this game sound like, though? It sounds like a Professor Layton game. If you know it, you love it. It's not bad, like that one forum user once said. Let's get into the critical 5 pieces for Professor Layton and the Azran Legacy. We have to start with the Azran Legacy. Must be a Nishiura staple, like the main theme for Professor Layton versus Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney, where the piece starts off really quietly, and then it picks up until this big swell into the melody. And boy, you're talking about the accordion melody here. The main theme of the game, obviously, if it's titled The Azran Legacy. It also plays in the cutscene near the beginning of the game, where the airship Bostonius takes off as they head to wherever the living mummy may be taking refuge. So just a great piece. I feel like ending the Herschel Layton games with this as a main theme is so representative of the Layton sound. And it's such a good piece. Like, I hear this and I'm like, obviously it has to be here if it's the main theme, but it's such a good one to add to this collection of songs.
For the first couple Layton games, I believe the title screen is just Layton's theme. That's literally all it is. And then it might have been Unwound Future, but I first remember noticing it in The Last Spectre where Nishiura just like took the limiters off, and the title screen music for all those games is so good. Like, the title screen music in Last Spectre might actually be one of my favorite songs in the entire franchise. Mm-hmm. And this is just another example of just Nishiura really getting real comfortable in there and just taking it away.
And that solo violin is another staple supported by the accordion. It's Layton to a T, and it's so good. Number 2 on the Critical 5. Where is that mummy located? She's located in the Silver Peaks of Froenborg. So even though you look at the world of Layton and it's Earth, honestly, there's a London. Like, he's from London, obviously, like the real places. And yet we go to Froenborg, which I think is like supposed to be Swedish. It sure sounds Swedish, but certainly a fictional location. So yeah, this plays when you're exploring the snowy town where Aurora is frozen before you get to that cavern. And you're interacting with the people there, and it's a good little introduction level where you're kind of getting the gist of, interacting and how to work with the world and puzzles and things like that. And you get almost like the chilly sense of the snow town, but also, again, the violin is amazing here, and it's just so calming and peaceful, and you just feel right at home to start your adventure here.
Yeah, it's very fitting that this is the beginning area, because when I hear this song, the vibe I get is like, this sounds like it would be the starting town in an RPG.
Yes, yes.
Like the small village where your hero begins from humble beginnings or whatever. And yeah, it's just very good. I especially, God, that violin, you mentioned it in the last track, but that violin is so good. The solo violin he does so much good stuff with it.
And you can tell that the recording is so good. It's not computerized at all. There's just soul behind it. Fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
That continues into the next piece on the Critical 5, another classic piece for this game. It's Aboard the Bostonius. So when you are going around the world on a globe-trotting adventure and you kind of need something to travel in, it would make sense that Aboard the Bostonius is the theme that plays when you are exploring inside the dirigible. It's a great word. Oh, we never mentioned that on the show yet. The Bostonius being this airship.
I guess BioShock Infinite might have had the opportunity. I don't know.
Oh, maybe. That's a good point. Well, from a violin in the Silver Peaks of Froenborg to the flute really driving the melody here, but I think the real star is the acoustic guitar. Starts out with this finger plucking and then chords supporting and just giving a really warm vibe here, as it's going to be a piece that you return to frequently as you're going across all these different lands, like fungi and things like that. So for this piece, just a quintessential Layton theme for this game specifically, but the vibe is all there. It's all the same. It just has to be here for a really important area that you keep exploring.
Yeah, I agree that the star of the show here is really the acoustic guitar. Like, yeah, the flute's playing the melody, but that guitar part is so good, and you describe it as warmth. It's very warm. It feels very friendly and good and nice, and I very much like this piece.
But number 4 is one of those tracks that we've been itching to talk about for a long time. Number 4 on the Critical 5 for Azran Legacy. This is Descole. Finally, we get to talk about the theme of Jean Descole, Herschel Layton's rival in these 3 prequel games. He's no Don Paolo, but Descole is quite the character himself. And boy, does he get just this dark, engrossing, orchestral theme that just right from the get, you're hearing the clip, that's how it starts. That's the beginning of Descole's theme, and you're just like, oh, we're in for it now that Descole has decided to reveal himself and his machinations at work. It's one of those pieces where I know we'll get to Layton's theme eventually on this show, but for the first prequel game that we're talking about in the Layton series, I had to bring it up here. It's a classic when you're playing these 3 games, and boy, Joe, I love this one.
I think as a song, I prefer Don Paolo's theme. Like, Don Paolo's sounds like Looney Tunes because he's not really a villain. He's just sort of around and he's kind of a buffoon and all that.
Yeah, he's a curse you, Layton.
Yeah, he's Dick Dastardly in Layton. But Descole is like a real villain. Like, he's an actual competent villain. And I think this song really brings about the real difference between those two.
Yeah, and the piece really goes places. I mean, it felt like 30 seconds was not enough because it goes into like a calmer, like a softer, warmer part before then it brings back like the evil tones. Ah, man, it's so good. And it just really shows the power of like live recorded orchestration. So good to hear in this game. Let's wrap it up though with the piece that Miho Fukuhara sings. It's the credits theme. This is Surely Someday. I'm going to try to include the Japanese recording so you can hear Fukuhara's performance, but YouTube no likey last I checked. So you may get the oboe here. I may even do a mix of both. Who knows? It's early. I haven't edited yet. So, but just a great credits piece, whether you get Fukuhara's vocals or the oboe performance. It's a wistful piece that looks to the future with hope that maybe friends can reunite once again. It's a great piece, and between the themes at the end of Unwound or Lost Future and this, like, they know how to hit on the emotions and play with the waterworks a little bit. Just a great piece. Has to be here.
Oh yeah, Nishira excels at just beautiful emotional pieces to end the games. I think Time Travel beats this one out, but
yep.
This one is still very, very good. And even if it's not the vocal version, like the oboe is still a very good instrument. I don't think we give enough credit to the oboe. I don't think we've mentioned the oboe at any point in this show.
Good double-reeded instruments, and once again, like, soulful performance behind this live recording. I mean, my goodness, just so good. For tracks on the cutting room floor, we each have 2. It's almost like we really like these games or something. Joe, what are your cutting room floor pieces?
So my first one is Airship Chase. This plays when you're having difficulties with Targent, specifically escaping Freundberg with Aurora. This is just the kind of song I love hearing from Layton, with that like frantic piano and this again that solo violin. I love this song, and it really kind of reminds me of some of my favorite songs in like Last Spectre or something like that. But yeah, that piano is going to town. It's so good.
The cello keeping the bass and rhythm behind it too. But you're right. The piano is so amazing. All of it comes together in a piece it's easy to listen to and get lost in, but also it's really exciting. It's so fitting for what this is. And it really just shows, I think, why Layton games are special, especially with their soundtracks, and why I miss them personally.
More people need to play Layton, guys. And my second cutting room floor track is Puzzles Abroad. I mean, I'm sure you can guess without me telling you that this is the puzzle theme. And, I mean, has to be on one of our cutting room floors. It's the puzzle theme. You're going to hear this song a lot, and it's very good. Another of those music box sort of themes. I don't think I like it as much as the original puzzle theme or the Unwound Future one, and definitely, as we've already covered, not as much as Puzzles 8 from Versus, but it's still very, very good.
Yeah, it's a tough comparison to Puzzles 8, you're right, but it's still up there. It's a great theme for this game. It's just, it falls kind of in the middle, I think, for some of the puzzle themes for the franchise as a whole. For me, my cutting room floor pieces, I think I have to mention Targent. You know, when this theme plays, stuff is going down with the big bad organization or with Leon Bronev and his plans, because the cool thing I have to mention with this game in particular is going into it, there were 3 big treasures of the Azran that were focused on in The Last Spectre, and there was the Miracle Mask, and you're like, wait, there were 3 treasures? Oh yeah, when Professor Layton and the Eternal Diva, aka one of the best video game movies of all time, that was actually consequential in this big Azran plot.
It's referenced in this game, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, absolutely. With Ambrosia, I mean, so when you're coming into this game and this big bad organization, Targent, has these 3 big treasures from the Azran civilization, but they need this last key, this big cavern that holds all the secrets together. It just really goes to show, like, you have a pretty solid criminal organization here, and these dark string themes going with the heavy brass coming in just really represents these this dark, sinister theming, and love when it comes into the game. You know, things are about to go down. with Targent. Really great theme.
Yeah, you don't tend to hear music this sinister sounding in Layton games. So it's definitely an interesting place to go.
On the complete other end of the spectrum, though, my other cutting room floor track is Warmth and Kindness. When we're talking about all of the heavy reveals at the end of Professor Layton and the Azran Legacy, there are several. It's literally like bam, 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 bam. You want to know everything that we've kind of been building up to? Here is everything. And this gut-wrenching piano song plays in just a particularly heavy cutscene when we're learning about Layton's past and repressed memories that even Herschel Layton had. I don't think it's as big on the emotional front as Unwound Future. I don't think anything will really top that, but for the revelations that this shows, this is a big one, and it's a Waterworks song for sure.
I mean, beautiful piano pieces always tend to do that in Layton games. I'm kind of the opinion that I feel like some of the twists are a little forced.
A bit.
That takes away some of it, but this song is still gorgeous, and I definitely think, it needed to be highlighted.
When you're asking who is Herschel Layton, you're digging into some stuff. So what will I never forget about this game? I feel like, those twists for sure. I miss Emi Altava as a character. But again, as I mentioned, I played this so quickly, really just not to get spoiled and see how this trilogy wraps up, that I probably didn't appreciate it as much as I could have. And so going back to its soundtrack and knowing that there were a lot of standouts here and something I had to bring to the show whenever I talk about Layton again, I feel like this is a good choice, but it still bums me out that I got to get to Curious Village, because how have we never talked about the Professor Layton theme on this show? It's going to be so far overdue whenever we do bring it up.
Who knows when that's going to come? I'm kind of in the same spot. I think I need to replay all of the Layton games, to be honest. But this just for some reason seems to be the one. It's between this and Miracle Mask being the two that I remember the least.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I just got to replay Azran Legacy. I don't own it, unfortunately. When I played it, I borrowed Ben's copy, but maybe someday. Surely someday.
There you go. Surely someday you'll get to play these games again, as should I. Well, good to talk about games, whether they involve Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney or Professor Herschel Layton. So that will do it for us this week on Original Soundchat. You can find me on Twitter at Pete Speakeasy. Joe is over at the Dobaga. The video version of the show is on the Rhymes with Asia YouTube channel, but it's that MP3 podcast version that you want. Hosted by Anonymous Dinosaur at anondino.squarespace.com. You can find Joe's other podcast, Smasher Pieces, there, and you can find both Original Soundchat and Smasher Pieces on podcast services all around the globe, wherever you get your podcasts, even on Spotify, where we have a podcast episode playlist, but also a Spotify playlist, where if we talk about a video game song on this show and it's on Spotify, it gets added to the playlist. Joe, are we adding anything this week?
Well, we had to have some price for the multiple Atlas soundtracks that got added over the past week, so no, neither of these games are on Spotify at all. Level 5 hasn't really put up any of their stuff, and I assume they probably have the distribution rights of the soundtrack. I don't know.
But definitely give a listen to all those Atlas tracks for sure. And then when you're done listening, you can find us on social media at Soundchat OST. Leave some feedback for us how we're doing with these episodes and suggestions for games you'd like us to cover in the future, which is going to be a focus for us in 2021. Then get your merch. Get your Anon Dino merch for Original Soundchat and Smasher Pieces at teespring.com/stores/anonymous-dinosaur. Working on some bonus tracks, giving a little space between Best of 2020 and Best of 2017, which is deep into production. Joe, who are we talking about next week?
I will be talking about Chipzel.
I will be talking about Kneels by Nelson. All right. To play us out, we've brought up Adriana Figueroa a few times before on this show, but when I think one of her standout pieces is an English vocal cover of Surely Someday, I feel like that's how I was introduced to her, honestly. Such a great cover here. Had to bring it up for Professor Layton and the Azran Legacy. That will do it for us this week on Original Soundchat. We'll see you next time. Take care.
For surely someday we'll be together once again. I know that this is not the end.